All right, everybody hear me all right? Last spot of the day. That's the fun time. All right, I think I've got 5 minutes. All right, so FusionSeven has built a blockchain platform that is focused on automating the supply chain for sort of any vertical market that is a high volume of transactions that need to be reconciled back to a contract or an order. And so we've built essentially our own applications and smart contracts structure and architecture all on microservices with Node.js. We've also built our own algorithms with consensus and validation. We have 7 patents we filed last year, so we were pretty busy. And we've done this to enable folks to essentially come up with their own blockchains. And so really focused on private blockchain and allowing corporations to manage their supply chain. It can essentially be, doesn't need to be advertisers or brands. It could be agencies, it could be publishers. We're really agnostic to that. And so essentially what we've done is we've built an easy to use reporting interface so you can measure discrepancies. And this is just showing sort of campaigns and publishers all the way down to the placement level, showing different counts, which would be different nodes on a blockchain where you can manage discrepancies and also send different alerts out for those discrepancies if they're over or under certain spend thresholds or impression counts thresholds as well. And so we've also built an ad hoc report builder that allows you to essentially set up those alerts and any type of report that you want against that data model that you develop. But it all really starts with smart contracts. And so for us, we started 4 years ago. And we didn't want to wait for the notion of there needs to be standard data or there needs to be standard rules in the industry for this to work. And so that's why we built this highly configurable architecture that allows you to define your own schema by whichever partner that you're working with and then tie that to a contract, which can also be tied to an itinerary. And so what you do is you have different contracts, and each contract has a contract template, and the template allows you to essentially define who that partner is, the type of partner, and then the attributes that you're going to collect as a part of that contract, whether it's insertion order in media or just like a purchase order or whatever. It doesn't matter to us underneath. And so once you create those attributes, you can write rules against those attributes, and so you can add based on the attributes that are in the model. You can sort of create your own conditional logic, quickly using a rules expression builder. And so I'm just gonna, create some fake things. And these can be, nested conditions and conditions, whatever. It doesn't matter. It all gets on the back end because it's Node.js. It's all gets converted to JSON and then gets executed on the blockchain on the back end. Now, what happens is a contract has an itinerary, and itineraries are the notion of any type of, think of a data processing pipeline, because every partner is going to have its own data in its own format, and you're going to have to be able to be flexible to ingest that data, clean that data however you want, filter that data. And so you can see we've got, depending on the partner it is, whether it's Yahoo or Hulu, what country that data is coming from. There may be different lookup keys. There may be different ways that you want to filter that data to be able to then clean it, and like removing certain characters or spaces, and then be able to map it to certain types of schemas for that partner, enrich it for naming purposes and reporting, and then ultimately clear. And clear is really where you're enforcing the calculations you want to happen. And so, for example, depending on the partner type, you may want to add, a rule that says, for if my partner type, and so I'll just go ahead in here and look for partner. Partner type, and I'll just set it equal to a DSPD. And then I'll just set a rule that I want to my profit margin to essentially be my profit divided by my revenue, right? And so if you've got sort of an idea of what your terms are in your contract, you can quickly come in here and then be able to set your formulas however you want, right? And you can add that rule to clearing, and then in that sense, when transactions happen, they go through the clearing process and the blockchain, these formulas get applied, those calculations happen, and everything you see in the reporting interface is what happened during this data processing pipeline, right? And so having said that, what we'll do is we'll actually push a transactions through. And so let me first create contracts. And so I'm just going to, there's several ways you can create contracts. You can just add them one by one. Or you can bulk import them. And so I'll just bulk import them. And then you can also create contracts via like an API connection into your existing planning system like Prisma or FreeWheel. If you're using that on the advertising side, with that, we can just essentially operate in the background, API connect in, ingest all those at bulk, and then those get authenticated and stored on the blockchain. And so I'm just going to select a contract template for Yahoo. And I'm going to select a file and then hit upload and create. Right, and then what we've done is we've set up a 5-node blockchain. And so for demo purposes, you've got different nodes here that we're seeing transactions happen against those nodes. And I think we've got 33 here. And so I'm just going to go here and go to my contracts. And then I'm going to execute those contracts that I just imported in. And I'm going to say that I agree to the conditions of the contract. IOs for Yahoo. Execute. That then essentially what that does is on each node, you've got contracts that then get stored and executed in the blockchain. And so as you come on the node, you would be able to then view the documents of those contracts and see the keys that get assigned to those contracts. And so I'm going to refresh this. Okay, and now we're up to, we were at 33 and we added 5, so we're at 38. So those all got stored on the blockchain, on the distributed ledger. And if you look at the key, you can start to see that you've got a key on here. And you can view document and see that this is a contract type that's now encrypted and stored on the ledger. And so as you look at the ledger of each of these nodes, you would see that that contract's encrypted automatically and stored on the ledger. Now once that's encrypted, then you can start to take transactions, right? And so transactions are captured in one of two ways in our blockchain. One is a tag. And so you've seen many companies say they're using a tracker or a tag. We have that ability as well. You could use a tracker or a tag. And then once that tag fires in real time, it would validate your private hash key against that smart contract. If it's valid, then it would store that transaction as a raw transaction in a ledger. Then it would go through clearing, apply your calculations to get to billable amounts, right? So all that happens, that can happen in real time with a tag. We also support batch reporting. As you know, there's a lot of, depending on the partner that you're working with, whether it's Facebook, Google, or WikiHow, there's a lot of different restrictions on people's pixels being placed on their pages, right? And so we also allow for the ability to collect data after. We call it post-impression or batch. And that's either through a report file or an API that we would integrate into any given partner and pull that data in. And so what I did was I just did that. And so I took batch of 5 records and tied that in. And so from here, what you can do is you can come in and you can load in your transactions. And so I'm going to drop in 5 transactions. I'll drop those into the data processing pipeline. And then I'll refresh. And then those have been processed through the pipeline. And so when I showed you the itinerary and the rules, all that gets processed through the blockchain. And then once you process through the pipeline, then you can start to validate that those transactions are actually hitting the blockchain. And so when you come to the back end, and so I'm going to just refresh this. And I'll look at the second node this time in the chain. As distributed ledgers should all be exact. And you can see I now have 43 objects written to the ledger, whereas before I had 38 after I added those contracts. So I added 5 transactions to get validated. And then those transactions, let's just look at the right view here. To get to okay, here we go. And so if you look at the keys, and I'm just showing you the raw data so you can see that it's actually happening. You have 5 transactions that were added. So we added 5 contracts from here. 5 transactions that got validated as raw transactions. And then those transactions actually got cleared as well. And so everything gets cleared and stored. They all have encrypted data sets and keys. And so you can look at any particular transaction. And you can see the attributes that are captured, as well as the encryption key that's tied to it within that particular transaction. And that gets stored on the blockchain. And then on the reporting side, you don't look at the back end debugger. I'm just showing you that's actually happening. On the front end, you would just look at your results for June. And you can see I added in transactions for these 5 days, right? So we had transactions the first 10 days. I took a processing file and added in transactions for the 16th through the 20th, right? Obviously, I skipped a file. But you can essentially get to what your billable amounts are for every day. And so as you start collecting data, whether that's through a pixel or through a report collection, data collection approach, that gets validated in real time against the smart contract, all encrypted via the private hash key. Once consensus is reached, it's stored on the ledger. And so this can be set up via the interface in terms of everything from your smart contracts can all be set up in the interface. The blockchain all happens on the back end. And you can architect your blockchain however you want. Our application blockchain, like I said, we have our own private blockchain, primarily because we believe that folks are going to stumble with one layer of contract logic. And that's why we sort of have our own inference engine with itineraries where we have patents around to allow us to be able to write rules at a global level versus an individual buyer-seller contract level. And so as you start to think about your business, we feel like a number of folks, especially in digital advertising, you deal with agencies, you have multi-parties across the supply chain, your relationships become more complex. And so the ability for your architecture to support that is necessary to be able to deploy this type of technology across the supply chain. And so again, any questions on how that works? And so again, our solution can be used for digital advertising. We've also used our solution in rights management, like for validating like royalty payments, like if you're Universal Music and you're an artist and Universal Music needs to pay out royalty payments to every song track that got downloaded. That's an example of a high volume business, billions of transactions, where you have thousands of contracts out there between Universal Music and every artist that needs to be cleared in certain different ways. Every contract has different terms and rates. And the same thing applies for digital advertising. We have billions of impressions to process in a day. We've also done it for similar to Axciom on the data side, where you can have a lot of different audience data that's being bought and sold, and that you can then be able to enforce the will of how you want to charge for that data that's being used. This is a smart contract level, and so we are not necessarily taking log files. It can be aggregated up to, it is impression level if you use a tag, but if you're using the batch approach, it's usually aggregated at the placement level.
If you're using a tag, every impression is blockchain log?
Yes. Yeah, and it's real time with the tag. The discrepancy can be between whatever you want. In that example, it was a third party, first party. So between an agency's ad server and Weather Channel, which was the publisher ad server. But it's going to vary depending on your buy. Yeah.
And then last, so this is a demo circumstance. You have slides.
Yeah.
Was that built specifically for the demo, or is that how is the system operating?
No, it's just for the demo. I mean, you can have however many nodes you want. Usually there's a minimum of 3. But yeah, you can set up however you want.